Okay, well, thank you all for staying on. And thank you to Sarah for organizing this interview. Today, as you know, I'm really pleased to be speaking with Professor Melissa Moyer, whom you all know. Behind her many scholarly contributions, this conversation is an opportunity to get to know more about the person behind the work, the experiences, the choices, the turning points that have shaped her intellectual journey. We'll be talking about her interests and how they have developed over time, the challenges and the inspirations that she encountered along the way, and how she reflects on her path now with the benefit of hindsight. Melissa, you ready?
I'm ready. I brought notes. Well, first of all, I want to thank Sarah for organizing this. It's been a really interesting session. I regret not having attended more TELC sessions, and I think it's a very valuable tool for the department and teachers. Too bad there are not more students here. Well, thank you for being here. Interested in listening to me. I brought notes because I'm able to talk about my life without notes, but I feel more secure having the notes in front of me. So if I'm not looking at you and I'm looking at my notes, it's not because I don't want to establish a rapport here. So I want to thank you for the introduction and for accepting to be doing the interview.
A pleasure.
And I guess now that I look back on my academic trajectory, I see it as a kind of a continuous journey shaped by the people around me, by my teachers, international colleagues from the Department of English Philology, and also very importantly by my students, some of them who are here. It's been a path marked by mobility and collaboration and driven by a long-standing curiosity about how language functions in people's everyday lives. At the core of my work is the belief that language is never just a system, but rather a social resource shaped by mobility, identity, and power. I've spent most of my academic career at the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, where I progressed from lecturer to full professor. At the same time, I've spent extended periods as visiting scholar in different institutional and national contexts, experiences that have been crucial in shaping my thinking, allowing me to test and refine my ideas through collaboration across disciplines and borders. Alongside research, mentoring undergraduates, master's and doctoral students, and contributing to academic service through editorial work, research leadership, and university administration, they've all been integral to how I understand my role as a scholar. And I've been able to accomplish all of this thanks to the support I've received both from the English department and the Facultat de Lletres, who have generally supported my endeavors, my trips, my absences and presences, and so on. So if you want to start off with the questions, I'll...
Sure. So I thought that we would start from the beginning, actually.
Okay.
If that's okay with you. So tell us about when you joined the department. What was the department like back then? And what were the circumstances that led you to join the department?
Well, obviously, as my experience has told me, the perception of how a person perceives a situation in a context will be different according to different people, and I may get some dates wrong. But to go back and when I joined the English department, it was in 1986, when Aranchu Sandizaga had recently taken over as head of department from Aquilino Sanchez in 1981. Prior to 1986, I had been working as profesora colaboradora at the Escuela de Traducción y Intérpretes, a university school that was pioneer here in Barcelona, and which in 1992 became the Facultad de Traducción y Interpretación. That's where I first met Felicity, for example, and that's where my university teaching started, actually. That was a time, the Autónoma at that time was known as the very progressive and revolutionary university. As you all may know, it was created in 1968. It was bubbling with political activity, which seems to have boiled down. But at that time, the Plaza Cívica didn't exist. And the only train station that was around was Ferrocarrils Catalans, the stop in Bellaterra. And from there, we had to walk along the perilous path known as Camí Vietnamita, cutting through bamboo forests to reach the campus. And since then, things have become far more civilized, thank heavens. So when I joined the department in 1986, it coincided with the arrival of a group of newly contracted teachers in language and linguistics, which is what I know more about. It seems that the literature department was a bit more consolidated with posts because there was Guillermina Fenoz, who was a very important person in the department then, Josep Maria Jaumà, and then Arantxa, who came in 1981. Andrew joined the department later Andrew Monikendam joined the department in 1984. And after that, but that was a bit later, Felicity Han joined the department, and Sara Martín after they finished their PhDs, Jordi Corral, Joan Courbet, and who do I have written down here? Who am I forgetting? And Jean Courbet, Jordi, and then there have been other teachers who have come in after that. But at the time that I came in, and Guillermina and Josep Maria, and then Andrew and I were more or less the same level at that time. And in language, the people who were already here was David Prendergast, Joaquin Dominguez, and Maria Josep came in 1983. I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at them in my papers here. And Mia Victori after that. So Maria Josep, in language it was Mireia, so the new teachers coming in were first Maria Josep, Mireia Ginás, Mia Victori, and Hortensia was here as well. And it was in fact with Mia Victori that we jointly presented ourselves to two posts as titular. And that's when the two of us became profesora titular at the same time. And it was a time when the department was growing. It was consolidating in the areas of language and literature. And it was a time where academic life in Catalonia still was very local. And people didn't really have the training from what was going on, especially in linguistics in other parts of the world. And there was a strong emphasis to leave, go out and study, get at least a master's degree, and if not a PhD at a foreign university. So I think that was one of the things that characterized, I think that was in Arantxa's mind at the time, but I think also it was something that I took on personally, and the people who worked with me. It was very important for me to encourage them to leave, to see what it was like doing graduate work at a foreign university, and also to participate in international networks, international conferences, and so on. So I remember this importance of internationalization because things were very local. it was also a period in the department which I think was marked by fierce disputes with the vice-rectorate over teaching resources as we struggled to secure additional staff to cover practical language classes. Also, this was a source of debate between language and literature in the department about resources and teachers and who got what jobs and so on. Well, sort of like today, but perhaps less bitter than it was. I hate to admit it, those days, but since those days, I think the UAB has changed drastically, and I would argue for the better. It's still far from what we would like it to be, but I think it has improved. I mean, despite the increased administrative burden that we're all carrying on with us, we have to assume, but the university has become a more accountable institution and less of a taifa kingdom. And I think this is good because in the olden days, which you have not experienced, it was very much who had influence and power to make decisions and so on. So the most significant transformation, though, for the English department came in 1999 with the adoption of the European higher education framework following the Bologna Agreement. I think that's what really kind of was the plan that set up what the department is today and how it has evolved and so on, and through processes of accreditation and so on. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about the department. I don't know later on if people want to ask questions. So.
That's so interesting. But tell us a bit more about yourself, about your training, and your interests and how they developed. How did you become interested in English linguistics and in sociolinguistics in particular?
Well, as I was telling someone over coffee, it's very linked to my own personal life experience. But my curiosity about language began at Georgetown University, where I completed my Bachelor's of Science and where I was first introduced to variationist sociolinguistics by key scholars like Ralph Fasold and Roger Schei, who were teaching there at that time. This was, of course, the heyday of William Labov and a time which Friedrich Moyer called the linguistic wars between Chomsky followers and all the others that included structuralists, semanticists, and of course, sociolinguists. This ideological and epistemological, I don't know whether to call it a confrontation, but debate that existed had a profound impact on linguistic departments all over the world, including the UAB, and on the scholars in the field who were always identified with belonging to one camp and another. And that's something that I remember also about the department and about what was going on and what was valued as the right way of looking at language and linguistics and so on. And of course, I came into it being a sociolinguist, which wasn't very well considered at the time. And I felt like I had to forge my way and convince people that what I was doing was worth doing. In the 1980s, I was funded to do graduate studies at Stanford University, where I completed my MA and where I was trained as a syntactician by leading syntacticians who had left rebelling against Chomsky, and included people like Joan Bresnan, Ivan Sag, Peter Sellers, Tom Wazo, and Paul Kaparsky, among others. Joseph Greenberg. It was a pleasure being with such inspiring people. And syntax has always interested me, and it's interested me as, even though I'm a sociolinguist, it's interested me as a puzzle or as an exercise in abstract logic and structure. But it was with the sociolinguists at Stanford, Charles Ferguson, John Rickford, and Penelope Eckert, who I was truly inspired by. I still remember doing field work in Palo Alto High School in a Black neighborhood in Palo Alto in California. And we were interviewing students about whether they were jocks or burnouts. and taking notes and things. And with John Workford, I worked as his research assistant in Creole and Pidgin languages, which for me really resonated because that was the beginning when I started to become interested in multilingualism and so on. So while at Stanford, the kind of questions that I kind of addressed, since the requirement was you had to do a thesis and research in either phonology or in syntax, I was concerned still with variation and what kind of models existed to explain syntactic variation and how it could be explained and patterned and so on. And so that's what I ended up doing my MA thesis on at Stanford. And some of these questions that I asked in my first days are questions that I'm still asking. I don't have a clear response to. And I think it's interesting that I don't have a response. Well, it might be me, but anyways. So the other person who was very influential in why I went into sociolinguistics, and if I'm taking too long to explain all of this, was José Manuel Blecua. He was the person who served as my mentor and my de facto PhD thesis director. He guided me in choosing the topic of English-Spanish bilingualism in Gibraltar, which has been, or which was, or which is, or a consequential choice, as it marked the beginning of a lifelong research interest in multilingualism and code switching. At that time, I was conducting, in the late 80s, I was conducting fieldwork in Gibraltar while simultaneously teaching and raising two small children. Those were challenging days, and whenever I see the young academics in this department now trying to balance teaching, research, conference presentations, and child rearing, I'm reminding of what a true juggling act it actually is. But it's something we don't talk about too much, but it is a challenging. You're always feeling divided between you're not giving enough time to your family, but you're not giving enough time to your profession, and so on. So that's a little bit about how the influence and how I got into sociolinguistics.
So you've talked about José Manuel Blecua and his influence, but of all the people and that you've met, the places that you've been to, and the experiences that you've had, is there someone else or any other experience that you think has shaped your thinking and your research? Is there anyone else that you would underline in that?
There's a particular person, and also there is certain experiences that have shaped my academic trajectory. Monica Heller is the person who perhaps has most profoundly shaped my understanding of the discipline of sociolinguistics today. It's through her work she introduced me to the perspectives of linguistic anthropology, showing me how language cannot be understood in isolation from the social, political, and economic context in which it is embedded. And I think this kind of ties into what we were talking about as critical approaches. I mean, you have to know the context. You have to take into account the economy. You have to take into account power, political and social. So her critical approach consistently challenged me to look beyond structure and surface patterns of communication and to examine the ways in which language both reflects and reproduces structure of power and inequality. Heller's scholarship really opened my eyes to the idea of linguistic practices and that they're never neutral, never. But sometimes we don't stop to ask why they're not neutral and whose interests are these discourses favoring. They're discourses that are deeply entangled with processes of social stratification, identity formation, and the negotiation of authority. She encouraged me to think about language not simply as a set of codes or abstract systems, but as a medium through which social relations are enacted, contested, and transformed. And her emphasis on the connection between language, ideology, and power has profoundly influenced how I approach my own research today, particularly in the work on migration and multilingualism in institutional settings, but more recently on my work on language and disability. Beyond her intellectual contributions, Heller's mentorship also modeled a way of being a scholar, rigorous, critical, and deeply engaged with social justice concerns. Her work has continually reminded me that sociolinguistics is not just an academic pursuit, but a lens for understanding and, where possible, challenging the inequalities embedded in everyday communication and language. And I was honored to sponsor her as the first honorary doctorate from the Department of Filología Inglesa in 2023. Another person who was very influential, especially in my code switching days, was Peter Mushkin from Nijmegen. And the doors he opened to my participation in a European Science Foundation scheme on code switching, language contact. But for me, he was one of the most inspiring and imaginative scholars I've ever had a chance to work with and to associate with. Unfortunately, he passed away several years ago, and I really miss him. As for experience, one of the most formative experiences of my career, however, came from a visit that was facilitated to me by Josep Maria Jaume to the University of Sarajevo in Bosnia, shortly after the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement in the summer of 1996, and with the support from the George Soros Foundation and Autónoma Solidaria. I traveled to teach an introductory course in syntax together with Jacqueline Guérin to students pursuing degrees in English philology. Their classrooms and much of their faculty, the school, the actual building, had been destroyed during the war. Yet, undeterred by this devastation surrounding them, these students gathered in the basement of the British Council in Sarajevo, eager to learn and rebuild their academic lives. The resilience and determination and hope that I witnessed there left a permanent mark on me, reminding me that education is not only a pursuit of knowledge, but also a powerful act of resistance and also of renewal. So those perhaps were the things that...
Thank you so much. I had forgotten about the Sarajevo experience.
That was, it really left, I'd never been in a country at war. The trauma and what these students went through to continue studying was an eye-opener for me.
So Melissa, looking back, what would you say have been the major points in your academic life? What would you foreground? I know it's difficult.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a potpourri, and I don't know if my answers fit exactly into the question, but I wanted to bring in some of the things that have taught me things about the university, about academic life, about students, and I learned a great deal from holding several administrative positions in the department, which have included coordinadora de titulación, coordinator of the master's program, head of the doctoral program. And perhaps one of the most important lessons that I gained was that institutions change very slowly. First, you have to impose a new policy, but to enact formal changes and meaningful implementation requires a change in the way of thinking of all the people who are around you. It's not just automatic. Here we're putting in a policy and things are going to change in the institution. And that, I mean, it seems obvious, but it was really eye-opening to experience and to see this happening now. And during my time as Vice Dean of Economy and Infrastructure at the Facultat de Filosofia y Letras, this insight became very clear, even more so than at the department level. As Vice Dean, what I'm proud of and I'm happy was to have overseen the planning and the construction of Modular, the research space in front of the library, where I strongly insisted that they include a kitchen and a small dining room, which everybody enjoys now, people who have experienced Modular. Joan's not here today. I think he's occupying the spaces. I also was responsible for the renovation of the Bar de Lletres and the installation of the outdoor canvas and the picnic tables. So when you go there next time, before the Bar de Letras, when we were here, smoking hadn't been prohibited at the university, and you would walk into this dense cloud of smoke that was unbearable. And so finally they renovated the spaces. They put in ventilation and things that were really good. And I always remember the anecdote that when I went to have lunch one day, and I got a sandwich, which was a salmon, smoked salmon sandwich and everything. And I ate it, and I became horribly sick. I had, it caused an enormous kind of reaction in my system. And I always teased them that they were trying to, since they weren't very happy about all the changes that were going on, I teased them about trying to get rid of me by poisoning me with their smoked salmon sandwiches. So anyways, that was the anecdote. But anyways, on another key moment in my trajectory within the department was the creation of a departmental journal founded jointly with colleagues in the department, as many of you are here, titled Links and Letters. And the journal published articles in English, literature, and cultural studies between 1994 and 2001. For me, that was an exciting and a very enriching enterprise that brought together teachers from both language, literature, and culture, as some of the present day can attest. But all these changes in the publishing world and the demands of making it a high Q1 journal was a challenge. Here we were doing journal exchanges, but I remember that period and that excitement and the project of Links and Letters, even though there were differences and things going on that some of you, Sara and Felicity, can remember. So throughout my career also, I've regarded international collaboration with colleagues as extremely important, particularly during the 70s and the 80s when studying abroad was far from common, as I mentioned. I think I played an important role in inviting many international scholars and sociolinguists to give talks in the department. And it was always supported by being able to pay the people who were there. So that was very welcome, no? And I strongly encourage my PhD students to go abroad, to study, to participate in international conferences and forums. So alongside these invitations of scholars, I also played an active role in organizing several major international conferences, which I think also gave the opportunity to many people in the department to work as assistants and to help out in the organization of the conference. This was the 4th International Symposium of Bilingualism, organized with full departmental support and with the participation, as I said, of many research assistants. Also, I participated, and it was a co-sponsorship of the International Pragmatics Association Conference in 1992, and several meetings of the ILA Research Group on Language and Migration, which Eva had to take over in 2013 when all of my family situation blew up. Some of the other things that I think were important that I'd like to mention is my current role as co-editor for the Multilingual Matters book series on language migration in institutions, and which I continue to work with, and we're publishing books, and also my dedication as coordinator of research projects for a period of 4 years also was something that gave me a very good idea of what research in English philology was like in the context of Spain at that time. So yes, those are the things that probably were relevant to your questions, my trajectory and key points, yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to research and learn a little bit more about your research. So perhaps you can tell us a bit more about your main research interests and also how your thinking about research has evolved over the years, and also about the connection between the person and the researcher, right? So do you feel that your personal experiences have shaped the kinds of questions that you've asked and the kinds of research interests that you've had?
Well, I think definitely my research interests and the questions that have guided my work have been deeply shaped by my personal circumstances, as well as by a sustained engagement with questions of society and social injustice. I've always been drawn to research topics that were in some way pioneering or ahead of their time. When I embarked on my PhD on code switching in Gibraltar, there was only one single substantial article addressing the phenomenon of code switching. And today it's all over the place. It's everywhere. So I was glad to have chosen a topic that was innovative and made a contribution, and people are still asking me for publications on the topic and so on. So my interest in Gibraltar, I think, is inseparable from my own biography. I mean, I'm a bilingual, bicultural, and from the age of 8, I grew up in Seville, in southern Spain, going to a Spanish religious school. And this bicultural, bilingual background, I think these experiences informed the kinds of questions I was asking about how code switching might be predicted, what were the social meanings of code switching it carried, how it was constrained by grammatical structure. That was something that really interested me. How can you tell what is a correct code switched example from a non-correct code switch example? And there were different theories, and there are tons of books about it now, outdated. People are asking different questions, but at that time that was one of the key questions, and it was a question that intrigued me because Spanish and English code switching in Gibraltar violated many of these grammatical proposals that scholars were proposing. And so at that time it was Peter Mushkin who was a central figure in the field, and as I said, the funding he provided from the European Science Foundation and the publications that were produced out of the workshops that were held in different European countries, in the Netherlands, the UK, Italy, Barcelona. And I was fortunate to take part in these meetings when I was still not I still hadn't obtained my PhD. But they were intellectually formative, and they were marked by a strong sense of collective excitement about the direction the field was taking. And the excitement, I think, extended to my research assistants who joined me at these workshops and shared in the emerging conversation. And it was also in this context that I first met Monica Heller. An encounter, as I've already explained, was a turning point in the development of my research and thinking. And nearly 20 years later, my interest in Gibraltar was powerfully reawakened through a project led by Andrew Canessa on the oral histories of Gibraltarians, in a project titled Bordering on Britishness, an oral history of Gibraltarian identity in the 20th century. And it brought together an extraordinary collection of testimonies from older generations in Gibraltar. It also involved teaching and training people to undertake this research and collect the data. And the project not only deepened the understanding of Gibraltarian identity, but also reconnected my earlier linguistic work with questions of memory, belonging, and history, giving new energy and direction to engagement with Gibraltar. Connected to this, my research, I think also I wanted to mention that through the Peter Mushkin in the European Science, we developed, and Eva was a part of this, the LIDES coding manual, which was based on Childs, that was set up by Brian McQueenie at the time. We set up a system of transcribing bilingual data based on Childs, and we actually published a special issue on how to go about doing this, and people are still using it today. I still use it to present my transcriptions in places, and other people who participated were Roland van Hout from the Netherlands, Penelope Gardner-Clores, Mark Seba, Marian Starrand, and other people who were part of this. So I think, that was important to mention, and it's had an important impact now.
Yeah.
Then also this research on code switching, which evolved into a sustained program of more than 7 government-funded projects examining multilingual practices, and it evolved into looking through funded projects, examining multilingual practices in the context of migration in the city of Barcelona. It's a body of work that marked a shift towards ethnographic engagement with migration, multilingualism, as it lived and negotiated in different institutional contexts. And out of this came Maria Rosa's thesis on NGOs, Eva's works in schools, and so on. So I carried out, what was important about this time was the fieldwork I carried out in a primary healthcare center in La Raval, one of Barcelona's most linguistically diverse neighborhoods. And my focus there was on how communication was made possible in a setting where most of the patients at this health center spoke neither Spanish nor Catalan, yet depended on public health services for healthcare. Observing the consultations, interactions, and informal exchanges, I was able to document the ways in which language could both enable and impede access to healthcare, and hence the concern with social inequality in the delivery of health. At the same time, I witnessed the extraordinary commitment of medical professionals who, motivated by a strong sense of responsibility and care, drew on gesture, brought in people, even though they were non-professional interpreters, using the telephone to account for the communication in this multilingual environment. And this work foregrounded multilingualism for me as a matter of social justice, revealing how everyday communicative practices shape migrants' access to essential public services. English, of course, was in there, and it emerged as a lingua franca in many instances, and which was also the focus of work that I've done. A more recent shift in my research from multilingualism is to the study of language and disability, which emerged at the intersection of personal family circumstances and also the opportunity by the European funding under Horizon 2020 framework. This project, it focused on people with dysarthria resulting from traumatic brain injury, and opened up a set of questions that I was struck to find had received so little sustained attention within mainstream sociolinguistics. When I first began this work on language and disability, and that's one of the projects I have for when I retire, is a book. I was surprised by how marginal research on physical and linguistic impairment remained in the field. While important contributions exist in linguistic anthropology, and as Marie-Josep pointed out to me earlier, in the field of phonetics, and much has been done on deaf studies, And there's been interesting work in conversational analysis, most notably the work of Candy and Charles and Candy Goodwin. There's been remarkably little engagement within sociolinguistics itself. Only a small number of exceptions, such as Suresh Kanagaraja in his book on linguistic incompetence, talking about how notions of competence in the field of sociolinguistics and from the global South challenge our Western European dominated ideas about what linguistic competence is. And so this gap has sharpened my sense of the intellectual and ethical importance of the project. And I think it's also in the field of sociolinguistics, I think it's pioneering, and I want to get more people to pay attention to it. So for me, the research represents a continuation of long-standing concerns with social justice and with groups whose communicative practices have been marginalized by dominant societal discourses and institutional norms about disabled people. I became particularly interested in how people with little or no intelligible speech and severely limited body movement communicate. How do they negotiate their identity when you don't have language? Because so much of who we are is communicated through language. How do they assert their agency when people treat them as not being cognitively with it, you know? And central to this, I mean, they can just see you without hearing you, and they'll identify you as someone who's not. They talk to you like a child or very slowly, as if you're not understanding. So, central to this work for me now is how agency is distributed across multiple semiotic resources and modalities, challenging conventional assumptions about what counts as language, what counts as communication and participation in this. Also, I can't talk about my research without mentioning the FIEN research team, which stands for Comunicación Intercultural Estrategias de Comunicación, which was part of the title of a research grant, and which existed for some 13, 15 years. And it involved a group of vibrant intellectual community bringing together a dynamic mix of colleagues, collaborators, PhD students, master's students, whose work has, well, for one, many of them have become faculty, teachers in the department here and in Lleida, Maria Sabate, Maria Rosa, Eva, there are others, but how they've become leading figures in their field and how their research has been published in the forms of monographs and also in articles. That is something I'm proud of, and and Eva, who's recently become full professor, also makes me very proud. I mean, I don't know if she assigns to me, but I feel like I planted a seed that has flourished, and it makes me happy. So I wanted to mention that, and I think about research. I don't know how we're doing for time.
Sarah, how are we doing for time? 5 minutes?
Oh, okay. Then we have to get through this. I had a few reflections regarding your next question.
Okay. Shall I ask?
Yeah, you can ask
Shall I
it
ask the
because I
question?
haven't heard it. Yes.
So, what do you see as your most meaningful accomplishments, or or maybe the next one?
Yeah, maybe let's go on to the next one because there's not. I mean, there are a few things that I wanted to mention which are important to me and which are continuing. Yes.
What advice would you give to younger scholars who are just beginning?
No, I wanted you to ask the other one first. These are not spontaneous questions.
This is not planned. So, as you reflect on your career,
yes.
what do you see as your most meaningful accomplishments, and what has brought you the greatest sense of fulfillment?
Well, I've already mentioned that to see the generation of sociolinguists who have come above is something that I feel very good about it. Makes me feel very good. I just want to mention, perhaps, I haven't worked in Catalan sociolinguistics, but I think that I have had a small influence in the field of the kind of research that's being done here in Catalonia. I'd kind of like to mention that two of my books have been given prizes. The Blackwell Guide of Research Methods on Bilingualism received the BAL, the British Association of Applied Linguistics Book Prize. And also a very early book of mine called La Cárcel de las Palabras also received the prize of the Miguel de Unamuno from the Basque government. And perhaps what is most fulfilling for me is teaching. I like teaching. I like helping students, and I like to help promote them to publish and other things. So now you can ask me the last question.
That's the last question then. What advice would you give to younger scholars who are just beginning to find their own path?
Well, I think I was thinking about this for a long time. I think one of the most important things is to follow questions that really you're passionate about, that intrigue you. I think academic work is challenging and it's often unpredictable. So I think it's important to pursue topics that you care about deeply. Passion sustains you through the difficult moments, and it helps your work, and it retains your authenticity and energy. There are a few other things I would recommend. Be open to collaboration and learning from others. Scholarship is rarely done in isolation. It's important to engage with mentors, peers, and students, participate in workshops and networks, and remain receptive to perspectives different from your own. Put yourself in these positions is a good, healthy challenge. Some of the most fruitful ideas come from unexpected conversations or interdisciplinary encounters. And I think it was one of the reasons why today's session was very nice. And keep social responsibility and ethics at the heart of your research. Ask whose voices are being excluded or included. Consider the impact of your work beyond academia. Research is not just about producing knowledge. It's about engaging with communities, creating meaningful understanding, and contributing to social justice. And I guess finally, I think it's important to remember that setbacks and failures are part of the process. They don't reflect your worth as a scholar, but are opportunities to rethink, refine, and grow. So I would say stay curious, patient, and persistent, and allow your values and interests to guide the journey. And this is what I have learned. I didn't always hold all of these positions, but it's what I've learned all of these years when I'm about to turn 70, which I find hard to believe. So I think with that, I've finished.
Thank you, Melissa. I think these moments of collective and individual memory are very important to understand better where we come from, who we are, and why we are the way we are. And we should probably engage in them more frequently, as Sarah keeps telling us. So thank you, Melissa, for your dedication, for your scholarship, and thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you for everything.
Well, thank you for listening to me. I hope you weren't too bored.